Hello there, sweet angels. Welcome back to And World Peace. I'm your host, Maggie Gehlsen-Burnett. We're just gonna skirt right on past the fact that I sound nasally as all fuck, okay? I've been sick for a little over a week now and can't seem to kick the last little bit of whatever I've got cooking over here. So we're just gonna bypass that, okay, and ignore it during this intro. Our guest today has admittedly been sort of my internet girl crush for the last year or so. I started following Heidi on TikTok about a year and a half ago, I think, and was just immediately drawn to the content that she talks about as a whole. She talks mostly about fast fashion on her TikTok. And as somebody who, again, admittedly didn't really know much about that, I just immediately was so intrigued by everything she had to say, from retailers who are fast fashion retailers to how this all impacts the climate crisis, everything in between. I just was really intrigued by, and her delivery is so amazing. We get into how Heidi and I eventually ended up connecting in this episode, so I won't spoil anything for you, but let me give you a little bit of a background about Heidi. So Heidi Kaluza founded the Rogue Essentials in 2016 as a creative way to support independent brands, businesses, and makers in the Pacific Northwest. With a background in ad tech, building early-stage startups, and a passion for sustainability, the Rogue Essentials has expanded their original mission to include climate advocacy, sustainable investment, and exploring ways to marry sustainable practices to profitability. Heidi is currently serving as head of sales for In the Loop AI, which is a re-commerce tech startup focused on reducing the friction in listing single SKU items online, and is looking to expand and encourage investment in women-founded companies that sit at the intersection of fashion and tech. Like I said, Heidi is just an exquisite person. She has so much knowledge as it relates to the fast fashion space, the tech industries, social media, politics, how this all intersects, and obviously what kind of lies in the underbelly of it all, which is the climate crisis. So it was really an enlightening conversation for me. I feel very fortunate to have had the chance to talk with Heidi. I believe that we are even considering a part 2 in terms of just other things that we didn't really get to talk about that we could gab about all day. So I believe that is going to be coming soon. But for now, let's welcome Heidi to the show. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to have you. I have so many things I want to ask you about. Just, I could pick your brain for literally days, but I will start with the question that I open this podcast with every single guest, which is, I would love to know about your sort of own personal undoing. And when I say undoing, I usually mean, typically women have several. That is sort of the, kind of underlying thread amongst everybody that I've interviewed, is that there are so many moments of undoing that they've been through. But I would love maybe the one that felt most profound to you, maybe even the one that led you into the work that you do today. Yeah, that's sort of what I'm after.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm extremely excited to have this conversation as well. And I hope that after everything that has happened too, and I'll get into the undoing because it does feel like one is currently happening.
Yes, exactly.
I'm currently being undone.
That's also a common thread, is that a lot of guests feel like they're in the middle of an undoing. Mm-hmm. So you are not alone in that.
Yes. But then the exciting part, right, is that then simultaneously you are becoming, which exactly. is such a lovely thought in these dark times.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you first asked me what, was my undoing, I immediately had the thought, which I love that I'm in good company, that I'm like, well, which one? But I think in the context of this conversation and what we'll talk about, I think it was a deeply personal and professional undoing that happened around 2019, specifically regarding content creation, taking my platform full time after moving to London, and just realizing how much I missed, I think, when I was, deep in enterprise sales in tech and working 50, 60 hours a week and just being at the time, happily ensconced in that world. But I think coming out of that and really comparing the creative briefs that I was getting, what these companies were asking me to say, with my professional background in reading annual reports, really understanding the goals and objectives of a company in order to sell to them, being on the other side, public facing, selling those products instead, and having a deep knowing that what they were asking me to sell was not what the product actually was. That was difficult morally, ethically, and I just stopped doing it. And it only took me about 6 months moving into affiliate work for fast fashion in order to do that. And for the listeners, I am a slow fashion advocate online. I work a lot in, garment worker advocacy, supply chain transparency, and I utilize Instagram and other social media platforms as a vehicle to put these ideas out into the cultural zeitgeist. I don't typically monetize a lot of what I do now. That's another part of the undoing. But I think it was that moment where where I realized that as individuals, I think a lot of us really truly understand what is happening, but we are ensconced in our little silo in the system. And that enables us, I think, to put up blinders, and not necessarily on purpose or intentionally, but it just allows that. And it sort of shields us from the larger overarching outcomes that we put into the world by doing what we do.
Yeah.
And I know that's like fairly general in the moment, and I know we're going to get into a lot in the episode, but I think it was really in 2019, with a lot of the, I think, social justice, points in time that came up, George Floyd's murder, the Pay Up campaign in the UK, and a lot of those moments where I recognized how threaded I was within the system and how I wanted to extricate myself from it and start to build business models that reflected the outcomes that we wanted to see, instead of ignoring the outcomes that actually were.
Yeah. That's so good. Wow. I have so many, just all of the questions. So
Hmm.
when you got into doing content creation, and I I hesitate to use the term quote influencing, because I don't consider you to be an influencer in that regard. Much like how I don't consider, some of my favorite people online, I don't consider them
Mhm.
to be quote influencers, because they aren't trying
Yes.
to ever sell me anything really. So but just very gifted content creators.
Mhm.
So you began that journey as somebody who was promoting fast fashion companies, is that right?
Well, so I first started out, so I have an interesting background because professionally here in Seattle, I was a part of the tech startup community. And one of the first companies that I worked for was a platform that built the technology that affiliate networks are built on. So digital
Mm,
tracking technology. And so I had a lot of insight into when, these platforms like LTK were coming up, and pretty immediately I clocked that they were very geared towards fast fashion, right? The Walmarts, Express, Revolve, all of those Lulus, those companies that I wasn't truly that interested in. And so when I first started my platform, because I had a full-time job, I was like, I'm going to utilize this to elevate the independent women-founded brands and businesses and makers here in Seattle that don't get a ton of recognition, because even back then in 2015, 2016, it was so difficult for those businesses to break through the noise that was digital advertising for
yeah.
hire, basically.
Right, right.
And so that was always the point of the Rogue Essentials, was what are the essentials that you don't know about, that you do need, that you should be looking at, instead of necessarily just what's right in front of our face the whole time. And so in 2019, when my at the time fiance and I moved to London, and I had the opportunity to move outside of that tech startup space, I was like, I have this platform, let's see what I can do with it. And then pretty immediately got funneled into affiliate work, because that was the lowest hanging fruit at the time. And
Yeah.
so I didn't do a ton of it before that. So I had this really interesting experience of being outside of it, flowing into it, and then reaching my highest point in affiliate commissions, and then being like, actually, my body does not like this. I do not like this.
Mm,
And then pretty immediately moving out of it, like 16
yeah.
months later. Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. Okay. So when you are immersed in this space of like, you're making this money,
Mm,
you are promoting these products that, are maybe a bit more accessible to people, I'll say, than an independently owned business that is local to Seattle or Chicago or, whatever city you're in. When
mhm,
you are promoting these fast fashion companies and utilizing things like LTK and ShopMy, and you
mhm,
start getting all of this money, for somebody who maybe is, I'm thinking mostly for like people who would be listening who would identify with this, what does the process of getting out of that look like, and what does that process entail from a personal standpoint, and also like
mhm.
from an online standpoint of being like, hey, by the way, I'm not posting on these platforms anymore, etc.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that right now unfortunately, there's no standardized path out of affiliate work, out of fast fashion work, right? And I also want to say too that there is no judgment here. We all have to get our bag in whatever way we can. And
Right.
I tend
Totally.
to I tend to take more pause with influencers or creators who are already wealthy and who
Mm,
are, kind of really like, this is just like the cherry on top.
totally.
And then this is also, I think about this selfishly too, because I'm like, well, that's just my point of view, right? Because I view those people similar to me who can kind of move out of these spaces and create new paths
Yeah,
because
totally.
I do have, you know, a level of support where I don't necessarily have to make sure that I'm bringing in X amount from this revenue channel this month.
Right.
I
Totally.
can have, kind of a longer perspective on it. And so to answer your question, I feel like I'm in the process of trying to build that right now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Because I was just building a little like media kit for a project last night, and I was going through my timeline since 2016, and I was like, oh, this is so interesting because
Yeah.
it was like 2016 I want to, elevate all these independent brands, 2019 in order to monetize I have to do affiliate work, and then in 2020 it's like, oop, she got radicalized. Okay. Oh no.
Totally.
you know, quick pivot to the slow fashion where at the time I did lose some followers, but I also, gained new ones really quickly. Um,
Yeah.
and then 2022, she got political.
Yeah.
And there was always politics before that, but I feel like 2020 and 2022 were really the election cycles where I was very, very active.
Yeah.
And then 2023, I started angel investing because
Yeah.
I noticed all of the gaps in order for us to even, build the foundation for us to move out of, these cycles of consumption that are really just based on conformity that at the end of the day oppress us and
Yeah.
marginalize us even further. And they don't allow us to, as women, as marginalized folks, to create our own systems that benefit us. It's
Mm,
at the
mhm.
end of the day when you're in, these fast business models, regardless of what your intent is, regardless of what the forward facing message is, the reality is that you will always get sucked up into what I call the center of gravity.
Yeah.
Because the larger you get, the more you need the center of gravity in order to support what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the system is designed that way. And it's very
Mhm.
smart. It's very sticky. And I always say, like, once you're in it, it is really, really difficult to get out of it. But
Yeah.
I think that also is just now in this moment.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think that they're especially, with the new administration coming in, prices going up, and just truthfully, deregulation across the board, there
Yeah.
will be a lot of opportunity, I think, for us to kind of build new systems out of the ashes.
Mm, mhm.
And so that's really what I'm focused on right now.
Yeah.
So I don't have an answer.
Yeah,
Because
totally.
right now, I think that contextually, that's going to be very, very different for each person. And I want every person to feel empowered to do what they need to do in this moment. Because, as a reminder, the delta between us
Mhm.
and the 0.001%, the billionaires, is so incredibly massive that
Yeah.
we have to do what works for us and what keeps us safe, while at the same
Mhm.
time, have one foot in the door, one foot out, and just
Yeah,
keep
totally.
building that foundation until it's strong enough for us to step over to the other side.
Mhm.
And I think that now I hope that we all really start to think strategically about what that looks like,
Yeah.
because we will be able to, but it will have to be coordinated. It will have
Yeah.
to be strategic. It will have to be a very, very team-oriented exercise.
Right. Yeah,
So, and,
absolutely.
yeah, so that's what I
Yeah.
hope for
Yeah.
all of this.
What do you think is like the first, you know, in this space that we're in right now, especially with this election we've just gone through and bearing in mind that politics does play a role in all of this, and we will get to that in just a second, but
Mhm.
what do you think is maybe the first step for somebody who, is not making loads of money off
Mhm.
of this thing, but they
Mhm.
want to be able to monetize their platform online and presence online,
Mm.
and they're feeling like this conflict, right? Of like they know and understand that the fast fashion industry is so detrimental to so many and keeps us in this cycle of oppression, especially for women and the ways that we are marketed to by fast fashion companies.
Mhm.
What's kind of like is step one just sort of the concept of like realization of just being like, okay, we're in this and this is like what this looks like?
Yeah.
Or is there something else that we can be doing to kind of like still like make that one foot in, one foot out a little bit more tangible, a little bit more real?
Yeah. Well, I think kind of the 3 key, like, societal components that you can think about in order to bring about change is, 1, the media, which we're all a part of, right? And then there's legislation,
Yeah.
and then there's the private sector. And
Mm.
so I think of myself as kind of one of those, like, giant balls of yarn or like a rubber band, that's just, like,
Yeah.
all, like, mixed together, and we're
Yeah.
all just kind of, like, threaded throughout these 3 different pillars in our society. And so I think that it's really taking stock of what you have access to, who you have access to, and how you can start, building that foundation for yourself, because eventually we're going to start to run into each other.
Right.
Right? It's like
Yeah.
because there's not that many places to go. So we're gonna
Mhm.
start to run into each other and be like, "Oh, you're doing that, cool, like, let me join you," or, "Oh, you're doing that, like, yeah, can I get in on that?"
Yeah.
And I think that looks like, or for me, at least, that looks like angel investing.
Mhm.
It looks like joining, mutual aid groups and
Mhm.
workforce development nonprofits here in Seattle, specifically in fashion. So I currently serve on the board of directors for one of those movements. It's called the Chaya Movement. And I just recently joined, and I'm very excited about the prospects that I'll have to help shape young people's outlooks
Yeah.
for or as they're going into fashion, and
Mhm.
helping them understand what their worth is, when they should be paid, help them find those opportunities. And because that's going to have such a larger impact over time than you not earning $5 from promoting a product online.
Right.
It's
Definitely.
almost like we have to transform it from the inside out. And
Mhm.
so kind of the paradox is you don't start at the end, you start at the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think that, and then another that looks also too like I do a lot of interviews for PhD products, for master's programs. I'm like cited in all these research
Yeah.
papers,
Oh,
and I think that that's really interesting
yeah.
because it's not that forward facing. You know, I'm not selling that right now. It's like that's all
Right.
kind of behind the scenes because it's not ready to be forward facing yet.
Yeah.
And so I think just taking responsibility and stock of who you are, who you have access to, what
Mhm.
resources do you have, and how can you put those resources out in a way that, not only flows to someone else, but will flow back to you like in
Mhm.
abundance.
Yeah, totally.
That sounded a little wellness for me, but it's okay.
Sounded
I
a
was like,
little wellness griftery, but
I was like, "Ooh, she's a little culty."
we're manifesting here.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
crying. Amazing.
But yeah, and so, and just joining mutual aid groups and also just speaking to your audience about what overconsumption looks like and being
Yeah,
really honest about the products that you're selling and not letting, the best sellers or the highest commissions or the content calendars that these giant retailers are putting out impact your content.
yeah.
Right? And I
Mhm.
think too that at the end of the day, one of the things that I feel is very visible to me that may not be very visible to other people who don't have my background in like ad tech and digital tech, digital
Yeah,
tracking technology, is that many of the creators that you see who are very successful, they have the force of 1,000 suns behind them. They're
yeah.
being elevated by these platforms. They're being elevated within Amazon. They're being elevated within LTK very,
Mhm.
very purposefully and strategically. Um,
Yeah,
they're being elevated by the brands. And I think it's really important to note that when that's happening, all of those structures exist as a pyramid. So I always say at best, it's an MLM, which can sometimes be legal. And at worst, it's a pyramid scheme.
yeah,
And so at the end of the day, taking stock of how much you're actually making from these programs too, and
yeah,
how much time you're spending on them is really important to understand what you're making per hour. Is this worth it for you? Are you better off, starting a newsletter or a Substack and monetizing that way? Are you better off creating, a one-off partnership with a locally owned boutique in your community?
yeah,
And then we have data at this point too, where small businesses, women-founded businesses, community-oriented businesses, they give so much back versus these mega corporations. And so it's
yeah,
just taking those steps, which are not small, and they're actually quite difficult in the system and the world that we live in, especially when you live in more urban areas that don't necessarily require community.
yeah,
um,
totally.
because you have so many other things accessible to you. But yeah, and also too, for specifically for fashion creators or fashion influencers, I think going the route of index is a great option. Like if you have a styling background,
Yeah,
you can go and you can get your followers to catalog their closet. They have an affiliate program where you can then get a little tit for tat for getting people to sign up. And then if you do styling, you can be a stylist on that platform. And that's one of my favorite businesses. And I am an investor in that
yeah,
business. And I think that these are all things where those create real connection
mhm.
and focusing on that versus, kind of doing this cycle of consumption that probably at this time is so oversaturated that it will probably not lead you to the economic prosperity that you're after in the first place.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I actually just wanted to note, I just downloaded this index the other day, and,
Yes,
I'm very excited about it.
it is
I
fantastic.
need to start, like, doing the flat lays and stuff of my clothes, but I thought to myself, how what a it's like Clueless. It's like the part where
Mhm.
she's going through her closet. I'm like, "This is a brilliant concept." So, I will absolutely be sharing that with my
Ooh.
followers, but
Mhm.
I mean, to your point, sort of like what are the small ways we can get
Mhm.
involved and sort of begin that process of I love that analogy you make of like the 1 foot in, 1 foot out, like how can we kind of
Mhm.
make that happen?
Yep.
And one important thing to note that I think, the listeners might this might provide more context is that I found you through TikTok like 2
Mhm.
years ago,
Mhm.
and I remember my friend and I were talking about some of your content because we
Mm.
both thought to ourselves, her and I basically at the same time went viral on TikTok for 2 separate, types of content, but
Mhm.
both were sort of these pieces of content that I went viral for the first time off of a beauty video, off of a
Mhm.
makeup situation, and she went viral off of an NFL wife video,
Mhm. Mhm.
but there ended up becoming such a demand, I would say, from people to be like, where's the link for this? Where can I buy this from? And so that sort of started this cycle of, okay, I'm going to link everything in my Amazon storefront. Here's the link to everything. My LTK is set up now, like, all the things. And then this friend of mine sent me a video of yours that came into her For You
Mm.
page about LTK and the tracking technology. And
Mhm.
I had this moment where, and that's when I started following you, because I was like, I need to know more about this. Like, I need to know how all of the things that I'm doing are impacting my audience, who they're impacting the planet, the global collective, and I think a lot of times we think, oh, the thing that I do, little old me, surely cannot have that great of an impact. And I think that's where we all get
Mhm.
bogged down and like sucked into the system further, is we
Yes.
think, oh, this one little purchase from Amazon, which turns into naturally 5 little
Yep.
purchases from Amazon, like, won't hurt anybody. But then we, see sort of the cycle of like how this impacts the collective. And so
Mhm.
I think learning from other people has been
Mm.
some of the most valuable, because once you know it, you can't unknow it. And that's the problem with it, is that
Yep.
like now everything you've taught me, I can't fucking unknow.
I know.
God damn it. Like, so that's where I'm like recently I just got and this is probably not that much better in theory, but I got a Target Circle One membership
Oh,
so that I can
mhm.
get free
Yep.
delivery, because
Mhm.
I said, okay, well, if I'm going to stop, shopping at Amazon, then I have to, like, in theory,
Let's
replace
be
it with something a
alternative.
little better,
Mhm.
but because of where I live and I'm not close to a major, like, metropolitan area, I was
Mhm.
like, well, I guess Target's probably like the best alternative, and like they,
Yeah.
it's sort of like, but you have to there's so much reconciling of like trading a corporation for
Mhm.
another. So anyway, what I want to get to next is, you mentioned politics earlier, and I would be remiss if I did not take the opportunity to dive on into this. So
Okay, okay.
let's talk about how politics plays kind of a role in the bigger picture of like overconsumption, particularly maybe with women. I would love to know your thought on that, on like how
Yeah.
this really impacts this subset of this marginalized group of women. I'm just so interested, any and all thoughts you have on that.
Ooh, okay. Um,
We have 5 hours, so it's fine.
fantastic. Great, we have all day, and then we have 9 parts afterwards.
Right.
Politics to me, I mean, I think it was just very apparent right away, and especially me being from the private sector and startup world, I think I'm just very acutely aware of what it really takes to build a business, what it takes to be successful now. And that particularly in this world, which we are still in the wild, wild west of social media, people are out here doing the most bonker things. Um, and to me, when I think about once again, like kind of those three pillars, the media, politics, legislation, and then the private sector, they sort of almost act like the three branches of our government. It's like they're kind of creating the bumpers or the boundaries or the guardrails, and then culture is coming in and saying like, oh, we want this instead. And then the private sector, has their goals, which at the end of the day don't really reflect the goals of,
Right.
of
Yeah.
the media or politics. And so it's this really interesting world of kind of, yeah, I mean building up the path, building up a way, in order to kind of keep some of these things in check. And
Yeah.
for me, it was, I believe, in 2022 when I first got involved with the Fashion Act, which is a state specific piece of legislation that would basically just blanket common sense regulation and guidelines over the supply chain transparency of businesses doing over $100 million. So this would really be, Zara, H&M, Amazon, Walmart,
Right.
big ones for the most part. And just seeing how, organizations like the CFDA and ones who say they care about sustainability, kind of coming in last minute and sort of bumping us off the docket and just being like, oh, we're not quite sure. It's like you start to see the strategy and you start to see the way the game is played and the way the game works.
Yeah.
And for me, at least, I very much resent that it's a game because another part of my background, some context, is I was an elite athlete growing up. I am very, very competitive. And when I think about how the competition in humans is used in this respect, I find it quite sad because we're dealing with lives, we're dealing with real outcomes. This is not a game.
Yeah.
We're not just, playing for a trophy, and it feels like there should be more teamwork across parties and not just political parties. I mean, like corporations, different sectors of people. And for better or for worse, we are so polarized right now that makes it really difficult. But then, you also see the opportunity because we're on this side of the pendulum to swing
Right.
it back and say, we can do all of this together and there can be a new way of doing this. There can be more transparent way. And, politics is just one of the mechanisms that's at the core of that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good. Yeah. I never realized how, and maybe this was just because I was young and naive and like, yeah, I just never realized how much politics played a role in everything that I
Yeah.
and I think that sounds again like a very like naive and sort of blanket statement, but I think that that has only grown in the last, 8 years specifically, but
Mhm.
even longer than that. And
Yeah.
specifically with women, like I think there is a very if this election taught me anything, it's that there is a very clear and apparent war on women that I did not even,
Yep.
I was not scratching the surface of like my
Mhm.
not in terms of my knowledge as to what was going on.
Mhm.
And I think, that's part of growing up, that's part of being, learning about feminism and doing your best to be a feminist. But I think that is a piece of kind of all of this that has really intrigued me in terms of like watching these influencers who claim to be, feminist women who are in support of women, but
Mhm.
then they, sort of very slyly like leave out politics as a whole from anything on their platform, and they don't mention, you know,
Mhm.
commissions they're making and like and they don't mention who they voted for, like, or if they voted at all, and like
Mhm.
and all of these things for me started to kind of like come together. And this like really there was this influencer who I loved and adored
Mhm.
for many years, and I remember when she followed me back on Instagram,
Mhm.
I thought it was like the most amazing. I
Yes.
was like, oh my god, I can't believe it. Yeah,
Dopamine.
yeah, oh my god, yeah, I was just like, I fucking made it, and
Mhm.
then I remember then 2020 happened, and
Mm.
it was crickets, and I didn't hear anything about, voting or, even encouraging people to vote. It doesn't I'm not saying you have to plaster who you voted for on your Instagram story, but
Mhm.
although I would appreciate it if you did. But like, but I just was sort of like, interesting, okay. And then 24 happens and same thing, just total crickets. And I made a TikTok and I was like, do you know why people do this? I just got to thinking about it and I was like, there's so much money in being
Yeah.
apolitical online. Like there's so much money that can be made from being very, just wishy-washy about your views or like what you're
Mhm.
doing. So case in point, losing, like over 100 followers after the day after the election when I posted my, about what
Mhm.
I was pissed off about. So I'd love to know how maybe that impacted you when you started posting more
Mm.
political content. Like, was that something that you noticed, a lot of feedback from people on? Were
Mm.
people really misinformed about how much politics actually plays a role in like our consumption and behaviors as women?
I think it's less about that and more about kind of having those, like the blinders that I talked about earlier, like having those disrupted, I think
Yeah.
is the hard part for people, because when you're online, and any creator knows this, like on the side of the phone that you're speaking into, it's just like you're kind of just talking into the void.
Yeah.
Like
Totally.
sometimes, sometimes my personal experience inform things. Other times the conversations I'm having inform things. So it's like sometimes I'll take on almost like someone else's story and say that when it's not
Yeah.
necessarily like exactly mine,
Mm,
because I'm sort of this like voice for my audience and like our
right.
collective experience. And so I definitely receive pushback, but over time, because it was the same type of pushback that I received when I made that hard pivot from I'm no longer selling fast fashion and I will
Mm,
only be promoting slow fashion from now on. Like literally, I'm just completely cutting out fast fashion. And the pushback is that people automatically assume that it's like a human to human judgment. Whereas for me, I'm like, you get to decide where you're
yeah.
in all of this, because I don't know you. I don't know your
Yeah.
life. I don't have, and you don't know mine either. Right. And it's like, so when I'm saying these things, it is not coming from a place of judgment, and it's not coming from a place of, oh, I'm perfect and I'm looking down. It's more of from a place of experience and knowledge, and trying to share that
Yeah.
in a world where we've humanized brands so much that human to human interaction feels really intense.
Yeah.
Because when it's a brand talking to a human, they're pandering to you.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what they are, and how they exist online, and how they exist to an audience. And then obviously, parasocial relationships have really muddled that world. It's
Yeah.
really confused us, and and I think that it has like rocked our social contract.
Yeah.
One of the things, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but one thing that I've noticed that is quite disorienting, that's really hard to explain people that are not necessarily like chronically online for what they do,
Totally.
is just how almost everything begins on social media. And then
Yeah.
like 3 to 6 to 9 months later, depending on the cycle, it like starts to proliferate in reality, like in real life.
Yep.
And I'm like, this is, and you see it in trends, you see it in politics, you know, I think a lot of people saw, myself included, like saw this like barrage of misinformation, disinformation coming from a mile away,
Yeah.
because I first saw it in fast fashion campaigns.
Yeah. Totally.
Like when Elon Musk did the, $1 million for, or the $1 million like lottery for voter sign up, I
Yeah.
was like, we were prepped for this. I was like,
Yeah.
those loop
Totally.
giveaways, we were prepped and ready for this.
Yeah.
Billionaires create the conditions for things to happen.
Mm,
They do not directly do things, from my observation. And so when you create the conditions, that's kind of those buffers that I was speaking about earlier, where it's like we've created the buffers in a way that doesn't really benefit us at the end of the day.
right.
Even though
Yeah.
it's like, oh, we have this opportunity to win $1 million, but what's that gonna do if we become an authoritarian, regime?
Right.
Like,
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, so I find that existing online and that human to human connection has been very, very disrupted with our ability to digitally communicate, because the rules are
Yeah.
different.
Right.
Rules are just
Totally.
different, and not everybody is aware of them.
Right.
And so, but also too, it's like that's another opportunity for us, right? To continue
Exactly.
to shape that and help to explain to people that it's, when someone is talking about something online that maybe you didn't know about before, or maybe you weren't aware of, and that you were involved in directly or indirectly, you get to decide to change that. You get to
Yeah.
decide what value that holds in your life, not me.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I
Totally.
think the more that we can have that conversation, so people feel empowered to take in information and to
Mhm.
do something with it, versus just letting the barrage of
Yeah.
whatever flow over you, and then you just disassociate. And which,
Right.
the point of all of this is so you don't think, so you
Yeah.
don't want to think. And then for
Right.
me, I'm like, I'm a stubborn bee. So I will continue thinking really hard. Like,
Same. Like, I will continue to be thinking all
yeah,
day. I'm gonna sit around and think
yes,
for days.
whether I like it or not.
What a beautiful, lovely segue, because speaking of not thinking, I would love to take this moment to
Mm,
dive into a few of the influencers that we have seen
yes.
in the last few years who have been a part of both the promotion of fast fashion and their own sketchy brands, and
Mhm.
also the like right-wing grifter weirdos and
Yep.
the crunchy to alt-right pipeline, all the
Mhm.
things.
Yep.
So in terms of like overconsumption, well, let me backtrack. So one of the key videos of yours that like really engaged me,
Mm,
and I was like, I think it was when I was like, I officially have like a girl crush on this woman, like I'm obsessed with her content, I love everything that you were putting
mhm.
out, was your videos talking about Danny Austin. And I explicitly, by the way, I say names explicitly on this podcast because I can't be fucked to care. So
Yep.
so I saw that video, and I remember having a friend at the same time who
Mhm.
was using the Divi product. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
I sent it to her and I go, "Hey, just a heads up, like we did not know that, not information I knew, don't know if it's information you knew, I assume not."
Yep.
And that sort of started again more conversations between this friend of mine. So just so you know, you're engaging a lot of people in broader
Fantastic.
conversations. So this is
That's
you're
the whole
doing
point of
really good
everything.
work. But that sort of video about her and her company and sort of these like really, for lack of better term, shitty products that like are just being like peddled out into the ether,
Mhm.
that really got me started on this thought process of the Skinny Confidential. And that's where I
Yes.
landed in terms of like
Mhm.
I think that's how maybe you found me on
Yes.
TikTok, was through
The
my
Dear
Skinny
Media
Confidential video.
video. Mhm.
And I was like, I remember making that video, hitting post, and it started to like kind of gain some views. And I was like, oh fuck. Like I messaged like attorney friends of mine because I was like, am
Mm.
I gonna get sued for,
Yeah.
for
Mhm.
slander? Like, so I would just love to know sort of your experience in all of this, and let's also not forget our BFF House and Habit and
Of course.
just her entire like weirdo
Yep.
lady donor for RFK Jr. All of these people seem to have one like underlying thing, well, multiple things in common, but the glaringly obvious thing to me is that they all sort of started in this position of like being involved in quote the wellness space or the online, you know, culture space, like, celebrity gossip, whatever. They
Mhm.
all sort of started in their own little like niche fields, and then somehow we have all kind of circled back to like this weird misinformation, alt-right kind of ideologies, and it all, I think, again, another commonality between them all is sort of this like they're all women who are
Mhm.
incredibly wealthy,
Mhm.
they're all white women,
Mhm.
and they all have access to more things than anyone else. How can people maybe do quote, I don't want to say like, you're independent researcher, independent thinker,
Yeah.
but how can people maybe look at creators through a more critical lens? Because I think there's so many people out there who blindly follow, Ballerina Farm, all of these people who they really have these aspirations to be like because of what they put online, without knowing that they are millionaires, billionaires, they have
Yeah.
access to so many more resources.
Mhm.
How can people look at those creators through like a really critical lens and start to be like, okay, how am I supporting them, maybe even blindly, as a part of all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's where the delineation that I have always tried to make, always, and will continue to do so, is delineating between the person and the brand.
Mm,
Because even though they are showing up with their face, with their personhood, they aren't incentivized as a human is. They are incentivized as a business, as a brand, as a corporation. And I think an example of what that looks like, right, is so we as creators, we understand that there's trending audio, that there are creator insights that tell people what gaps there are in the content that's being served on social media platforms, right?
Right.
And that heavily impacts the content strategy of these brands. Because the more you can address those gaps and address those content needs, the more you can hop on to the trending audios and the trending sounds, the more views you'll get and the more effective your brand's marketing flywheel will be. And so I think it's just really important to acknowledge that it's not a human. It's
Yeah.
not a person. And that is not their unfiltered thoughts. Like they are heavily incentivized to say and do the things that you see online.
Mm.
And I think one of the interesting things about my journey is in order to try to like address the gaps that allow us to bring humanity into business, I've almost completely detached from all of that, and so I've detached from the vanity metrics, I've detached from the trending audios, and I'll probably start to get back into it because it feels like Instagram is, as a tool, is just going to need to be more surface level moving forward, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
But just recognize that that person does not have your best interest at heart. Another example that I think will help people, especially with, the FOMO or like, the feeling that you get when like you think everybody has a product and you're odd for not having it or not wanting it or whatever, and then you get pushed into that, conformity and consumption pipeline. Is that a lot of, especially like LTK is a good example. They work with the Amazons, the Expresses, the Walmarts on content calendars, and they
Mm.
put out, incentivizations for people to promote specific products.
Yeah.
And they tout that as a way to become a quote unquote LTK millionaire. And that is like the bedrock of, the sales funnel or the flywheel, I think, for a lot of these companies. And that is also free labor
Mm.
at
Yeah.
the end of the day.
Right.
And that free labor is funneling into the support of these larger entities, these larger creators, these larger brands like Danny Austin that are really siphoning a lot of value from the work that you're doing for them without you really not getting a lot in return. And
Right.
it's not always the case for some people, but it pretty much, when I, what rudimentary math I can do around this with the data that we have is it does reflect the MLM, like very, very few people, I think it's less than 15% actually profit from this in any real way. And then
Mhm.
there is a lot of debt. And so I think about that with Amazon as well, especially with like the Amazon affiliate program,
Yeah.
that a lot of these creators, like I think about, with like Dear Media or the Bachelor franchise, who are
Yeah.
sort of kind of like funneled into this as, talent. And it's like, that's their only option,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Like once they're in it, they're in it. But yeah, I think it's just, delineating between the human aspects and
Yeah.
business aspects, and then just recognizing that, and it is sad at the end of the day because I think a lot of this is driven by loneliness, it's driven by a sense of wanting to belong. And I also think too, in terms of, like the Danny Austins, and it's so funny because I feel like my outlook on all of this is like so nuanced, and you get
Right.
a specific slice of that on Instagram.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, I still think that these women work incredibly hard.
Yeah,
But
totally.
I think that they have built something that is unique, that
Mhm.
is powerful and valuable.
Yeah.
But who is actually benefiting from that power? Who is
Right.
actually benefiting from that value?
Mhm. Mhm.
Because it's most likely not the people purchasing the products. Because I think, were you the one that told me that your friend was using Divi, but it was during like the postpartum?
Yes. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
That's
exactly.
true. I've gotten so many messages like that where it
Yeah.
was like, I didn't realize that I was just being sold a product in the stage of when my hair would just grow back naturally.
Yeah.
And then assigning the success of my hair growth to this
To
product
the product. Yeah.
when your hair is most likely going to grow back anyway. And if it doesn't, then you should be going to see a doctor.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's
Yeah.
this, and so to me, I don't want to call it smart, because to
Mhm.
me, that's actually, in this moment in time, with where we're at in the world, with what we know about climate, it does not feel smart,
Yeah.
but it feels effective.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think just starting to, kind of make those delineations and talk about them more, and also talk about them like empathetically. I think that for me, kind of doing a moratorium of my content, I think I can come across really hard or really like intense, because I am. Like, I am all of those things. And I like to be that way. And I have had to be that way in my life a lot, working in, male dominated spaces. But in the future, I really want to bring like the empathy into it too,
Yeah.
and hope to recognize the humanity in the people that are engaging in a lot of these activities and kind of like holding up these systems, because otherwise there's no way for us to like collectively get out of it.
Right. No, that is an excellent point. I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine the other day. The friend I've mentioned on this podcast, by the way, is the same friend, 6 different ways. So this is literally the same.
Great.
Apparently I have a lot of really good conversations with this friend. But anyway,
I
so
love it. I
her
love
and I
it.
we
Invite
were
her to
chatting.
a happy hour.
Yeah, been lovely. But we were having a conversation about how, and I think, I would say 90% of the people that I interview on this show could
Mm,
have gone a completely different direction with things.
yes.
And I think
Yes.
you being included, you could have gone down the route of becoming like the LTK
Yes.
millionaire, or like the ones that sort of are upheld on that
Mhm.
app.
Yep.
And the friend of mine and I were talking about how, I was recruited to join an MLM when I was like 19.
Mhm.
And I joined, and I remember being so excited, and then I was so devastated when like nothing came of it, and I had like lost a bunch of money,
Mhm.
and her and I were also having this conversation as it relates to wellness and sort of the crunchy
Mhm.
mom type
Mhm.
situation. And we both grew up with moms who were essentially old hippies, like, and that's where the original like crunchy term came from. Is it
Mm,
came from this concept of like working to save the planet. Like, this was
yeah.
the original crunchy mom was like an
Mhm.
actual like climate advocate,
Yes.
like there was somebody
Mhm.
who's advocating for the globe to be taken care of. And we were talking about how basically like we could have gone so many different ways. And I look at the type of content I was consuming 4 or 5 years ago,
Mhm.
and I could have very easily gone down the rabbit hole of,
Yep.
being an RFK Jr. fan. I could have very easily
Mhm.
gone down I was a health coach for women right after I got out of college. Like, I
Mhm.
could have very easily taken this sort of like crunchy approach to life and been an anti-vaxxer, like all the things.
Mhm.
And and then whoop, radicalization. And
Yep.
so like I think that looking through the lens of empathy with these women
Mhm.
is to your point critical, because it forces us to look at where we also could have been, and like how we
Totally.
also could have gone a different way.
We are not
And
that different.
exactly, we are more alike than we are different. Like,
Yes.
that is so important. And I just love that you brought up that point, because it is critical to this entire conversation of like, I have, when I made that video about the Skinny Confidential,
Mhm.
I felt very intensely. I don't think I came across very intense in the video, because mostly I was scared of like, an attorney coming after me, but like,
Sure.
but I was very, after that video, I was very, very intensely committed to letting everyone know that I thought that they were bad people, and that I thought that they
Mhm.
were like, doing really shady business practices and all of the things. And I look, that was even just a couple of months ago. And I even think to myself now, like, I think you may just be really misinformed. And I think you may just really not have like the tools or resources to like really
Yep.
kind of think critically about this a little bit more, or you have gotten so sucked into this life and this way of being that you may not see a way out at this point.
Mhm.
And so I think looking at it through that lens versus the like, you pieces of shit, what's wrong with you? That type of lens, like that
Mhm.
also I think is a much easier way to hold space for them than to be so angry all the time at
Yep.
everybody online. So
Yes. I know people that is funny, and I never know because I feel like with Danny Austin, it's been interesting because they have become sort of, I don't know, an example of a lot of different things.
Mhm.
I think, especially with like the cross pollination of de-influenced, which is so interesting to me how that all came about, and like that's why she came back onto my radar after years
Yeah.
of not following that brand and that influencer. But when I made the first video about the Danny Austin brand co-opting the term de-influenced, I used Mean Girls as the main reference. Like, one,
Yeah.
because that was trending on the platform with Selena Gomez and Hailey Bieber, and I was like, this will absolutely make this go viral, which I want many, many people to see it.
Right.
Now I basically try not to go viral because I'm like, let's just have small conversations.
Yeah.
Let's not have these like big ones where everyone's confused, everyone's coming in from multiple angles.
Yeah.
But I used Mean Girls specifically because at the end of Mean Girls, we all come together.
Mhm.
And that has always been my hope throughout this arc because, for better or for worse, like, these women are still community leaders.
Yeah.
They're
Mhm.
leaders. Like, their community listens to them and they trust them. And I think that at any point in time, they can pivot to a different model,
Yeah.
uh, if they have the resources behind them to do that. You know, but that is always my hope, is that we kind of are going through this really kind of massive period, especially white women, of understanding who we are, why we're here, and that we actually are like better together than we are separate. And, I think that, unfortunately, the blinders, fortunately or unfortunately, whichever way you look at it, those blinders are just going to dissipate. And in the age of information, we have never, here in this country, and I think for the group of people that we're talking about specifically, we have never had to reckon with the visibility of the
Mhm.
outcomes of our decisions.
Yeah. Mhm.
And that is no longer an option.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I hope that we will all recognize that. And maybe we're in the stage of, trying to get Regina George to eat all the protein bars. And, Katie is like trying to steal whatever her man, or you know what I mean? Like, I'm forgetting the
Yeah.
plot now.
Yeah.
It's like, then hopefully Regina George gets hit by the bus
Yeah.
and then
Right.
we're all friends. But it feels like right now is the bus barreling,
Yeah.
you know?
Amazing.
And so, but that has always in my mind been the arc that we'll go through,
Yeah,
and
totally.
that hopefully we will come out on the other side, maybe a little battered, maybe a little bruised, but coming out on the other side in a way where we can see each other. Because I think for me too, I have like I think I have an interesting mix of experiences. It's, I've lived half my life with access to digital media, half my life without. I have existed in completely male dominated spaces. I invest now. So I have this really interesting insight into venture capital, which is also very male dominated. I talk to many Chads and Brads from the Yale,
Yeah.
and it's interesting. It's a
Yeah.
completely different mindset.
Yeah.
And what is said in forward facing messaging very rarely ever reflects what is happening inside of those circles. And so I think that for me, trying to kind of be like a harbinger of this information it's difficult because, women like the wellness influencers or like the Danny Austins who have literally been doing YouTube since college, they have no access or context to these outside worlds, right? And all of that context informs the things that I'm trying to create context around.
Yeah, totally.
And it's a windy, difficult road. But at the same time, I feel like it's very, very valuable for all of us as we're moving forward and building new systems and trying to bring equity and equality into the world of business where there
Yeah.
really truly is none. Like
Yeah.
we think that we've made it really far and we have not.
Yeah,
You know?
totally.
And then the higher you get, I think, in that structure, the more beholden you are to the system that upholds it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. So kind of going off of that then, do you feel like there is a way to exist online as a, and I mean, of course you do this, you exist online in this way, but
Mm-hmm.
maybe for just a more average person,
Yeah.
who hasn't had your background and your experiences, is there a way to exist online and want to be maybe in the content creation or even
Mm-hmm.
influencing space
Yeah.
in in an ethical in
Mm.
an ethical way? Does
Yeah.
that exist?
I mean, I think so. But I also, once again, I think that at this point in time, we have no standardization. We have no foundation for this. So I think that everyone has to have their own standard for
Yeah.
what that looks like. And I would encourage everybody to create that because I also think when you really know yourself and your business and you start to kind of look at what you can do
Yeah.
versus what other people are telling you to do, you can find a lot of different ways. Like I said, for me specifically, I work on the Fashion Act. I do a lot of content creation for legislation. I do a lot of work with, like those workforce development nonprofits, and then I do a lot of because there are also, and this is. I know sustainable fashion has somewhat taken a beating recently. I feel like sustainability is big fashion is trying to really sweep it under the rug. It's like, oh yes, the last 10 years they didn't happen. Let's just
Yeah,
start all
totally.
over. And I think the more that we can not let that happen and the more that we can use some of like and so sorry, I'm trying to think of like concrete examples. So like another way, so one thing that I did when I was doing more consulting is I would charge larger brands more
Right.
and then
Mhm.
put some money into a pot for the smaller brands that may not have budget.
Sure.
So thinking
Mhm.
about sliding scale within your
Yeah.
models, right?
Mhm.
What that looks like, how you could do that. And then also really seeking out organizations that you can consistently work with. And I think for me, like the Fashion Act is one where it didn't pass last session. So it's like now we're on to the next. And we're just doing more advocacy work, bringing more people into the fold, creating more connections. And the more we do that, the more the foundation is being built. And then once again, we can kind of take that step over into this new system. But I think the thing that is really exciting about this time is it doesn't exist. We get to create it and we get to build it. And this is a huge, I cannot express how huge this opportunity is.
Yeah.
And it will be difficult. There will be tons of forks in the road. Like, there will be tons of opposition for this other dying system because the system is
Yeah.
dying. That's what's
Yeah.
happening.
Right.
That's the cycle that we're in right now. And in capitalism, there's creation, there's maintenance, and then there's destruction. And we're in the destruction period right now. And even though I don't necessarily see a way out of capitalism at this moment, I think we can zhuzh it, to more meet our needs and, the needs of the more marginalized. And that can be built into the process, whereas that's not built into the process, which is what makes all of this so difficult. And then also just remembering that we are just individuals working within a larger system. And the way to change the system is once again not always doing that end piece of what product am I selling? It's why is this product even being made in the first place and how do I change that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good question to ask ourselves. Yeah. Why is this product being made in the first place? I love that.
Yeah.
So what are some brands that
Mm,
you felt you love, enjoy, you
yes,
would promote very willingly,
so many.
that you feel like are doing a good job in terms of,
Mm.
really, like, practicing what they preach, and in terms of not making this, like, crazy, silo of capitalism keep churning,
Mm,
like,
mhm.
yeah, I would just love to know.
Yeah, 100%. Well, absolutely love Index, like I said. I just feel like
Yeah,
that the data sets that they're creating and the accessibility that they're giving people to information about the clothes they're wearing is just so important. I mean, you get to track price per wear, you can open your closet to your friends. It's just I feel like that's
amazing.
the bedrock for a new system, for a new way for us to really interact with each other through our clothing. So Index is one. And then in terms of brands, so I think for like beauty products, Do Mighty is a company that I love. They are plastic free moisturizers, and they come in like these really beautiful blocks, and they have these beautiful tins, and they're just doing real work in terms of creating like a standard for plastic free, water
Love
free,
it.
uh,
Mhm,
you know, plastic free, not water free, plastic free beauty.
mhm,
Vermouth Beauty is another
mhm.
brand that I absolutely love working with. I'm actually headed there this afternoon. But
Amazing.
they
Love
are a
that.
plastic free lip crayon.
Oh, love.
And which, and the, it just, it's amazing because I think sometimes, beauty is pain, beauty can be something that slows us down, whereas vermouth just feels good on, and their mission is so important. It's to make women feel really good and
Mhm.
enhanced, and
Yeah.
that they get to choose what their routine
Mhm.
is and how they bring that into their life. And then on the manufacturing side, they are doing some extremely important work to build manufacturing processes that are also plastic free, because
Mm,
these
mhm.
are these are complex problems that
Yeah, totally.
exist within the supply chain and the manufacturing that is also so complex. And the exciting thing I think about women continuing to enter the workforce, not going the trad life route, is that women are inherently built to take into account all of these different threads throughout the process,
Yeah.
right? Whereas,
Mhm.
at least in my experience, a lot of male executives, a lot of male VCs, they are very focused on one little teeny tiny microcosm in the system,
Yeah.
and optimizing that point without engaging with any other issues, right?
Right.
But I think women in particular can just automatically, inherently do that because we're kin keepers.
Yeah.
We are
Mhm.
always taught to pay attention to everything that's happening around us, not just the one thing we want to focus on. So when there are women like Meg, who is one of the founders of Vermouth, who is not only creating a beautiful, valuable product. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
everything's amazing about it. It's
I'm
so smart,
literally
so
writing this
clever.
down right now because I'm
Yes.
a beauty gal,
Yes.
so I'm
It's
literally making a note.
it's amazing. But then also not just a beautiful product, but the systems that make it so then other people can participate. It's
Yeah.
so impactful, and it's so beautiful, and it's so inspiring. And that's what I want to know about.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's what I want to be involved in and see. And
Yeah.
right now, I just think it's so sad that we have to wade through so much in order to find the people who are simply doing the things that need to be done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, once again, Vermouth is, I love my consignment stores here in Seattle. I'm very much like a local gal. I love to just like walk around and bop into shops.
Love it.
So there's the Refined Closet, there's ISO Seattle, there's Black Sands. And the beautiful part about all of this too is that you get to know the founders, you get to know the business owners, you interact with them, and they talk about their philosophies and their challenges, and it just gives a lot of insight, and I think really makes shopping feel good again,
Yeah,
you know?
totally.
And let's see, what are some other? Dancing Kind is a beautiful brand. They do these like amazing made to order dresses out of LA. Proof CA, so Proof Canada, is also insane. Like it is just the
Amazing.
most beautiful, well made like corsets and dresses. Gosh, I mean, there's so many. There's Decade Studio, which is denim, also
Amazing.
amazing. Nettle's Tail, Tamara Mollis, Laura Jean. I was just in London. She's a beautiful women's wear designer, and I got to go to her studio for the first time. And then, yeah, her pieces are just also made to order. They do a giving back Friday where they give more to their garment workers and they pay living wages. They're very transparent about it. And so they're all out there. You
Yeah.
know, they're all out there. Oh, I also love Any Bag Project. They're out of New York. There's this guy named Alex. He is just like the consummate, like happiest person. Like he's
Love
just like
it.
a little pocket. I'm like, can I put
Yeah.
you in a pocket and take you with me forever? Because you're so happy. You're working so hard. And they're literally creating a textile out of just plastic bags
Oh my gosh, it's incredible.
from this like super, old loom technology. And
That's
and
amazing.
yeah, and just the fact that it's like I get to meet these people, I get to know them, I get to carry the things that they make.
Yeah.
It's
Amazing.
so exciting. And so these are all I think the brand like yeah, these are all the brands that are coming to mind,
Yeah.
but there are so many more,
It's amazing.
and yeah, I love to know the people that I'm working with. And I think that if you can kind of like build little micro economies around yourself, that's also
Yeah.
something that's important. Oh, Salua lingerie, the most comfiest PJs. Mm,
I'm gonna be dropping some coin on some
yeah.
of these pieces. Perfect timing with Black Friday.
Yes, I know,
Um,
right?
I love it. That's so amazing. Okay, so one of my last couple of questions for you.
Mhm.
How does somebody understand, or how could somebody know and understand when a brand they are purchasing from
Mm,
is maybe a fast fashion brand? Is that
mm.
something that's always inherently like apparent to you,
Yeah.
or is that something that we could like dig a little bit deeper and find out information on?
So I don't love to put that burden on the consumer. So
Mm,
instead, I like to flip that around and implement what I call like the slow fashion mindset. People have different names for this, different versions, different ways to implement this in your life.
yeah.
But basically, it's just asking yourself, am I going to wear this?
Yeah.
Am I going to wear this more than 30 times?
Mhm.
And so it's taking back that empowerment and that ability to discern
Yeah.
because you can't control what a corporation is doing.
Right.
And right now, it's, big fashion makes up 80% of, the brands that we have access to that tell us about themselves at all times. And those marketing budgets are bonkers,
Yeah.
right? And so
Mhm.
when you're busy, when you have kids, when you have a demanding professional life, I don't love to put that burden on the consumer because at the end of the day, it's not helpful.
Yeah,
And
totally.
so flip that around and say, is this piece fast fashion for me?
Mhm. Yeah, I
And
love that.
yeah, and then just really taking into account like as you buy things too, because if you are caught in that cycle of consumption, it's going to feel really like no one just stops.
Yeah.
Change management has to occur. And so if you're in that cycle of consumption, just start to pay attention to how the things make you feel. Do you
Mhm.
feel really good when you receive that and you put it on for the first time, but then do you wear it a second time? Does it
Yeah.
feel as good?
Mhm.
Because I find a lot of the things that I have in my closet now and that I wear over and over again, it's that value proliferates over time.
Mm. Yeah.
I have this blue silk dress that I got secondhand from the Refine Closet, which is a luxury resale platform or boutique here in Seattle. And I've probably worn that thing like 100 times at least. Like it's one of my favorite outfit repeats. And I was just at a wedding in Spain and My husband's best friend, who is also one of my very good friends, he was just like, Heidi, this outfit. He's like, you just look so good. And I was like, thank you. I've worn it 298 times. Like,
Amazing. I love
but
that.
you like sink into it,
Yeah.
you just,
Yeah.
it becomes like a second skin. And
Mhm.
then you can feel, this is getting a little woo woo, but it's like you can feel the memories, you can feel the confidence that you've had in that.
Yeah.
And then you can feel really confident knowing how people receive you in that outfit too.
Mhm.
And so that's the way I think about it.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. That's amazing. Okay, my last question for you. So what would you say maybe to somebody who this question always takes me back to like my time in pageantry because
Mhm.
when I was really immersed in the pageantry space, one of the like cornerstone questions that a lot of panels of judges love to ask was it was sort of when we were first really like, or I guess the general public started to become more immersed in and aware of like the climate crisis. Like it
Yeah.
was, around I would say 2014, 2015, people were really like, fuck, we gotta
Mhm.
like,
Yep.
scientists were like, hello, like we have to do something here. So these panels of judges, their favorite question to ask girls about the climate crisis, because you can't get like too in the weeds with like, 19 to 24-year-old women about the climate crisis,
Mhm.
is, what are some things, what would you say to somebody who believes that what they do is not going to make a big enough impact on the climate crisis? So I would love to ask you that question and
Mhm.
understand like how would you maybe reframe that for somebody who thinks that like, oh, the Amazon purchases aren't a big deal, I'm just going to keep buying from there, I'm just going to keep
Mhm.
over consuming, this is a phase of life, quote unquote.
Mhm.
Like whatever I do is not going to make a dent in the problem that we face.
Yeah, I mean, one, I would say you're correct.
For sure.
You're correct. Like, that is a correct assumption, but that also you can look at it through multiple different ways, right? So you're
Yeah.
either looking at it through the individual lens, which is like,
Mhm.
yes, correct. Whatever you do in your lifetime is, all combined together will not impact the climate crisis. I'm using
Yeah.
air quotes.
Right. Right.
But then when you look at it through the collective lens, that's a completely different story. And I think that at this point in time, we don't have a lot of metrics that enable us to understand the outcome of our collective actions. That's
Yeah.
something that I'm really looking into, understanding how to bring that into the cultural zeitgeist and bring that into our lives in like a real tangible way that speaks to people. Once again, I keep going back to Index, but I think Index is a really good example of that.
Yeah.
Because if you have a beautiful way to show how you wear your clothing and what clothing becomes valuable over time, that has the potential to impact so much consumer behavior moving
Yeah.
forward, and not only consumer behavior, but the products that are being made in general. And also too, I think that people should think more about, collective action, even if they're not, you don't want to go and, stump around for legislation. Cool, no problem. But
Right.
within your corporation, what
Mhm.
ability do you have to shift in tiny ways the way that corporation operates? Because corporations and businesses, they are all run by people. And we have these cycles of like, oh, it's like playing hot potato. It's like, oh, it's your fault. It's your fault. You have to do this. I'm doing
Yeah.
this. And then we have the greenwashing and all this stuff. And it's like, but what if we just kind of slowly started to move away from that?
Yeah.
What if we were
Mhm.
just more honest with ourselves, And I think that we're starting to, I think, maybe see, like, the seeds for that, hopefully. Because the other thing that I wanna really encourage people about is that dissent from the system is in and of itself an act that has impact. Because the more you can remove yourself from a system to build a new one, because we're humans too, it's like we are all threaded together, so even though we're in that period where it's like we have the machete in the middle of the jungle. We don't know where the path is. we're all just kind of like, we have instincts. And I think we are starting to kind of come together, and there is a real potential to start more moving as one around this, especially as, once again, the blinders fade away.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's what I would tell people about individual or collective action is, the way that you define it or think about it fully depends on which lens you're looking through. But then also try to gravitate towards organizations, towards movements, towards communities that, kind of like celebrate the impacts of the collective, because then that will become more visible to you. So your individual actions will feel more impactful.
Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Heidi.
Of course.
You are just like, you are full of wisdom and knowledge. And I've learned so much in this conversation myself. And I
Well,
know that everyone else will learn so much as well. And this is such a impactful conversation because it impacts so much of what we do on the day to day. And so I can't wait for people to listen to this and hear all of
yay, me
your
too.
insights and like all
Yeah.
of your advice about like how we could maybe start to shift this
Mhm.
entire conversation and shift the entire collective of where this is all headed. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate
Before we
you.
wrap up,
Mhm.
please tell everybody where they can find you, your handles, your website if you have one, all the things.
Yes. So definitely in a period of major flux right now. So no website, one to be coming soon. But you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at The Rogue Essentials. And you can also follow me on Substack at deinfluence.substack.com. And that's it for now. Oh, and I guess you can follow me on LinkedIn too. It's where
Yeah,
my professional entity exists.
phenomenal. I love it.
Heidi Kaluza on LinkedIn.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Heidi. You are just an icon. Thank you.
Oh,
Thank
no,
you.
thank you. I appreciate it.